On June 25, 2013, the CIA released a document it had fought for 8 years to keep sealed. It was an internal history of a spy plane program written back in 1992 and buried since. Somewhere inside its pages, in plain typed text, sat 2 words the United States government had never officially put on paper before in this exact way: Area 51. A researcher named Jeffrey Rickelson had filed the request for it in 2005. He waited 8 years for an answer. When it finally came, it wasn't a confession. It wasn't dramatic. It was a bureaucratic release, quietly posted online by George Washington University's National Security Archive, with a map attached. A map of the base that, for half a century, the government wouldn't even say existed. Except, and this is where most retellings of this story get it wrong, that's not actually where the silence began breaking. The government had already let this secret slip years earlier, in smaller, quieter admissions. 2013 didn't invent the truth about Area 51. It just finally said the name out loud. So what actually happened out there in the Nevada desert? Why did it take the most powerful intelligence agency on Earth almost 60 years to say 4 syllables everyone already knew? And what was really being hidden before people started asking about aliens? Start with the ground itself, because the ground is the whole reason this place exists. Groom Lake is not a lake. It's a dry salt flat, flat as a tabletop, baked hard by decades of desert sun, tucked into a stretch of Nevada roughly 80 to 125 miles northwest of Las Vegas, far enough that in 1955 it might as well have been the moon. It sits inside what's now called the Nevada Test and Training Range, a sprawling restricted zone controlled by Nellis Air Force Base, right next door to the Nevada test site, where the U.S. government was detonating nuclear weapons throughout the 1950s. That proximity to the nuclear site wasn't an accident. It was the entire strategy. On April 12, 1955, 3 men flew over that lakebed in a small plane. One was Richard Bissell, a CIA officer overseeing a secret new aircraft program. One was Colonel Osmond Ritlin, and one was a Lockheed engineer named Kelly Johnson, the man behind Lockheed's legendary Skunk Works division. They were looking for somewhere to test a new spy plane, something that could fly higher than anything the Soviets could shoot down, high enough to photograph missile sites from the edge of space. Looking down at that empty white flat, ringed by mountains on every side, with no roads, no towns, no witnesses for miles in any direction, Kelly Johnson knew immediately he'd found it. Johnson gave the site a name designed to sell it to the engineers and workers who'd have to live there: Paradise Ranch. He later admitted flatly that it was a dirty trick. There was no paradise out there, just heat, isolation, and secrecy. But the name stuck in a shortened form. People started calling it the ranch. President Dwight Eisenhower personally signed off on acquiring the land. By July of 1955, CIA officers, Air Force personnel, and Lockheed engineers were quietly moving equipment and trailers out onto that dry lakebed, building runways where nothing had ever stood before. Because the whole operation sat right next to an active nuclear testing ground, the CIA had an instant, built-in excuse. If anyone asked what was happening out there, the answer was simple. It's part of the Atomic Energy Commission's testing operations. It became the ready-made shield for something that had nothing to do with nuclear weapons at all. The airspace above the site was locked down completely. Restricted Zone R4808N, nicknamed over the years the Box. Dreamland. Red Square. No flights permitted at any altitude. Not for weather, not for wandering pilots, not for anyone. And the name that would eventually eclipse all the others, Area 51, didn't come from a UFO crash or a government cover story dreamed up to sound ominous. It came from a grid, a 1950s CIA and Atomic Energy Commission map divided the region into numbered zones for internal use, and this particular parcel happened to be numbered 51. That's it. That's the whole mystery behind the name. Bureaucratic filing, not mythology. On August 1st, 1955, Lockheed's chief test pilot, Tony LaVere, took the first U-2 out onto the new runway for what was supposed to be a routine, high-speed taxi test, rolling the aircraft along the ground fast enough to check its handling, but not fast enough to take off. Except the U-2 was built to be extraordinarily light, with enormous wings designed to carry it to altitudes above 70,000 feet. LaVere hit speed, the wings caught the air, and the aircraft lifted off before he meant it to. The first flight out of Area 51 was, by the CIA's own account, an accident. Once U-2 flights became visible in the sky, and pilots and air traffic controllers around the country started reporting strange, high-altitude sightings, the government needed a cover story. They told the public it was a weather research airplane, flown under a program by the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, the predecessor to NASA. It was, by every historian's account, a thin excuse, but it held, because nobody had any reason yet to dig deeper. Kelly Johnson didn't stop with the U-2. Through the following decades, his Skunk Works division kept sending aircraft out to that same dry lakebed to be tested in secret. In 1962, it was the A-12 Ox Cart, first flown unofficially on April 25th by test pilot Louis Schalk, then officially 5 days later, then pushed past the speed of sound on May 4th. That aircraft's design would evolve into the SR-71 Blackbird, the fastest air-breathing aircraft ever built. Later, in the early 1980s, the same base would host early flights of the F-117 Nighthawk, the first operational stealth fighter, entering service in 1983. For nearly 30 years, every one of these programs shared the same footprint. Build it in secret, fly it in secret, test it against an empty sky where no civilian aircraft was ever allowed to look up and see it. That is what Area 51 was actually for, not extraterrestrial biology. Airplanes nobody was supposed to know existed yet. By the 1990s, the secrecy had a human cost, and it came from the inside. Starting in 1994, a sheet metal worker named Walter "Wally" Casa, who had spent years working at the site, began developing painful skin lesions and severe respiratory problems that his doctors struggled to explain. He wasn't alone. Other former employees were reporting the same symptoms. What they described, through their attorney Jonathan Turley, was grim. Throughout the 1980s, according to the workers, the Air Force and its contractors had taken 55-gallon drums of toxic waste, dumped them into trenches the size of football fields, doused them in jet fuel, and set them on fire in the open desert. The workers had a nickname for the smoke that used to roll across the base. They called it London Fog. Another worker, Bob Frost, died of a kidney illness, his own doctors linked to industrial toxins found in his body. His widow pursued a wrongful death claim, and that's how the case grew teeth. The Project on Government Oversight got involved, and Turley took it further, representing workers in a case that became known as Kaja versus Browner. Here's where it gets almost unbelievable. The government's defense wasn't to deny the illnesses, it was to invoke something called the state secrets privilege, a rare legal tool that let the government block the workers from obtaining the evidence that would prove what they'd been exposed to, on the grounds that revealing operations at the site would compromise national security. The case went to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The government won. The Supreme Court declined to hear a further appeal. The workers, sick and dying, were told the details of what poisoned them were classified. But a federal court process needs at least a location to argue about. So in 1995, President Bill Clinton signed a presidential determination, a formal exemption for, quote, the Air Force's operating location near Groom Lake, Nevada, releasing it from federal and state hazardous waste disclosure laws that might otherwise force classified information into the open. Notice the phrasing. Not Area 51, not even close. Operating location near Groom Lake. Even while legally acknowledging a secret facility existed, the government still wouldn't say its name. In 2003, President George W. Bush reaffirmed that same exemption with a new presidential memorandum. This is the piece almost nobody remembers. Years before the CIA ever released its famous 2013 document, the U.S. government had already, implicitly, admitted there was something classified happening near Groom Lake. Not to satisfy curiosity, but to shield itself from a lawsuit brought by its own poisoned employees. And 3 years before that lawsuit escalated, in 1998, the Air Force went a step further and officially acknowledged that the site existed at all. Not named in detail, not mapped, just acknowledged. 15 years before the CIA document everyone remembers as the reveal had already, quietly, partly happened. While all of that was unfolding in courtrooms and legal filings nobody was reading, something else had already made Area 51 a household name, and it had nothing to do with spy planes or toxic waste. In May of 1989, a man using the pseudonym Dennis, his face hidden from the camera, sat down for an interview with investigative journalist George Knapp on a Las Vegas television station. That November, he came back for a follow-up, this time unmasked, using his real name, Bob Lazar. Lazar claimed he'd worked as a physicist at a facility he called S4, which he described as a satellite site near Area 51. He said his job had been reverse engineering captured alien spacecraft. He claimed the government had 9 flying saucers in its possession, one nicknamed the Sport Model, constructed from something like liquid titanium, powered by an element that didn't yet exist on the periodic table, element 115. None of that has ever been independently verified. The universities Lazar claimed to have attended said they had no record of him ever enrolling. About a year after his interview aired, he was criminally charged in connection with an illegal brothel operation. His core claims, the saucers, the element, the reverse engineering of alien technology, remain unconfirmed, disputed, and unproven to this day. But here's the strange part. Bob Lazar, whatever the truth of his story, is the reason most people on Earth had heard the words Area 51 at all before 2013. His claims dragged this obscure Air Force test site out of government paperwork and into pop culture, into movies, conspiracy forums, late-night radio. Whatever he actually saw or didn't see out there, Lazar built the mythology. The CIA, 30 years later, only confirmed the ordinary human Cold War truth underneath it. That mythology had one more explosive moment left in it. In the summer of 2019, a joke Facebook event went up with the title, "Storm Area 51, They Can't Stop All of Us," calling for a mass raid on September 20th at 3 in the morning. It was a joke. Everyone involved knew it was a joke. And still, at its peak, over 2 million people marked themselves going. When the day actually came, nobody stormed anything. Somewhere between 75 and 150 people showed up at the actual gates, and a few thousand more turned up at nearby desert festivals thrown together in surrounding towns. No one breached the fence. The local sheriff called it simply a joke that got its moment of fame and nothing more. So here's what actually happened. Laid out straight. Area 51 was never a secret in the way people wanted it to be. It was built in 1955 to test a spy plane, using a nuclear testing site next door as cover. Its name came from a grid on a map. Its first flight was an accident. The government, partially, implicitly, admitted it existed in the 1990s, just to fight off a lawsuit from its own dying employees. The Air Force acknowledged it outright in 1998, and in 2013, after an 8-year wait on a single records request, the CIA finally put the name Area 51 into an official, declassified document alongside a map, closing the loop on decades of a very specific, very narrow kind of denial. The CIA refusing to say 4 syllables everyone already knew. It was never a confession about aliens. It was the government finally admitting in writing what it had spent almost 60 years building airplanes to do in secret. The saucers, the Element 115, the 9 spacecraft, that story belongs to one uncorroborated man from 1989, and it's never once appeared inside a single verified government document. What's real is stranger in a quieter way. A patch of desert nobody was allowed to fly over. Workers who got sick and were told the poison that hurt them was classified. A president who signed away disclosure laws using a location instead of a name, and a document that took 8 years to surface, finally saying in plain text what everyone already suspected, but no one in Washington would type out loud. There are a lot more secrets buried in places like this. Subscribe, because we're just getting started.